Imagine you're 18 years old. You live in a tribe of only 40 people. Every face is familiar. You know who laughs the loudest, who tells the best stories around the fire, who always returns with the biggest catch. And over the past few seasons, one person has slowly become more important than everyone else. You look for them without realizing it. When they smile, your day feels lighter. When they disappear into the forest with another hunting group, you find yourself wondering when they'll return. But something about your world is completely different from ours. There are no weddings, no engagement rings, no legal marriage, no written promises, no priest standing between two people. So, what did love actually look like 30,000 years ago? Did our ancestors fall in love the same way we do today? Or is love itself just another invention of civilization? The answer turns out to be far more surprising than either of those ideas. Because your own body still carries clues left behind by people who lived thousands of generations before you. For most of human history, there were no cities, no kingdoms, no farms, no money, no last names. Your entire world could fit inside a small camp beside a river. Perhaps 30 people. Maybe 50. Rarely more. Everyone depended on everyone else. If someone was injured during a hunt, everyone helped. If food was scarce, everyone shared. Children were raised not only by their parents, but by grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings, and trusted friends. Survival wasn't an individual achievement. It was a group project. And inside that small community, relationships mattered. A dependable partner could make life easier. Someone who shared food, helped care for children, stayed calm during dangerous winters, worked beside you instead of against you. Love, if we choose to call it that, wasn't simply about romance. It was deeply connected to survival. But that doesn't answer the biggest question. Did people actually stay with only one partner? Or were prehistoric relationships completely different from what we imagine today? For a long time, people answered those questions mostly with assumptions. Some imagined prehistoric humans as perfectly faithful couples. Others imagined a world with no lasting relationships at all. The truth, as archaeologists and anthropologists have gradually discovered, appears to be much more complicated. And strangely enough, one of the biggest clues isn't buried underground. It's inside your own body. Imagine meeting two very different relatives. A gorilla and a chimpanzee. Both are among our closest living relatives. Yet their family lives couldn't be more different. A male gorilla is enormous, nearly twice the size of a female. That difference isn't an accident. For millions of years, the biggest and strongest males fought for access to multiple females. Winning those battles meant leaving behind more offspring. Eventually, their bodies became living records of that competition. Chimpanzees tell a completely different story. Their males are much closer in size to females. But another part of their anatomy tells scientists something fascinating. Because female chimpanzees often mate with several males over a short period of time. Male sperm ends up competing inside the female reproductive tract. Over evolutionary time. That competition favored males capable of producing enormous numbers of sperm. As a result, chimpanzees have remarkably large testes relative to their body size. Their bodies preserve evidence of an entirely different mating strategy. Now, look at us. Humans don't resemble gorillas. But we don't resemble chimpanzees either. Instead, we sit somewhere in the middle. And that simple observation would completely change how scientists began thinking about ancient human relationships. If human relationships were written into our bodies, what exactly do they say? The first clue is surprisingly simple. Look at the average man and the average woman. Across the world, men are generally taller and heavier. But not by an enormous amount. On average, men are around 15 to 20% heavier and about 5 to 7% taller than women. That difference matters. Because in nature, body size often tells a story. One that most people never think about. It wasn't hidden in ancient bones. Or buried beneath forgotten villages. It was hidden inside the male body itself. Relative to our body size, human testes are larger than those of gorillas. But much smaller than those of chimpanzees. That may sound like an odd detail. But to evolutionary biologists, it speaks volumes. In species where females regularly mate with several males over a short period, sperm compete to fertilize the same egg. over thousands of generations, that competition favors males capable of producing more sperm. That's why chimpanzees have unusually large testes. Gorillas don't face that challenge. A dominant male usually has exclusive access to the females in his group. There is little sperm competition, so their testes remain much smaller. Humans, once again, sit somewhere between the two. Our anatomy doesn't point toward lifelong exclusive monogamy, but it doesn't support unrestricted promiscuity either. Instead, every biological clue seems to whisper the same message. Our ancestors probably lived somewhere in the middle. But biology only tells us what was possible. It doesn't tell us how people actually lived. For that, we have to imagine something far more difficult than surviving a hunt. Imagine raising a human child. Unlike a newborn deer that can stand within hours, or a young chimpanzee that matures much faster, a human baby remains completely dependent for years. Years. It needs food, protection, warmth, teaching, constant attention. No single parent could easily provide all of that alone, especially in the harsh environments of the Ice Age. This may be one of the reasons humans evolved something unusual. A pair bond. Not simply attraction. Not just reproduction, but an emotional attachment that encouraged two people to stay together long enough to raise children successfully. Modern neuroscience suggests that chemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin help strengthen these long-term attachments. You might think of them as part of the brain's ancient social toolkit. They don't force people to stay together, but they make deep emotional connections possible. And those connections may have given our ancestors a better chance of seeing their children survive. For tens of thousands of years, love wasn't only about feelings. It was also about cooperation. About sharing burdens. About surviving another winter. But if pair bonds were so important, why do we also find evidence that they weren't always exclusive? That question has puzzled scientists for decades. And the answer doesn't come from biology alone. It comes from people. From hundreds of cultures, spread across every continent on Earth. So what did relationships actually look like? The answer comes from the people whose way of life most closely resembles our distant ancestors. Modern hunter-gatherer societies are not living fossils. They are modern people with their own unique histories. But they can still offer valuable clues about the kinds of social environments humans evolved in. One pattern appears again and again. Most adults form a primary partnership. A man. A woman. Sharing food. Sharing work. Sharing responsibility for children. But that doesn't mean every relationship lasted forever. Nor does it mean every partnership was completely exclusive. Life was flexible. People died. Groups separated. New partnerships formed. Some relationships remained lifelong. Others did not. Human relationships were never simple. And perhaps they were never meant to be. Then, something extraordinary happened. Around 12,000 years ago. In several different parts of the world, humans began farming. For the first time, food could be stored. Land could be owned. Animals could become property. Wealth no longer disappeared at the end of each season. It accumulated. And once wealth could be passed from parents to children, relationships changed. A wealthy man could now support a much larger family than before. In many early farming societies, powerful men married multiple wives. Meanwhile, many lower-status men had none. Archaeologists and geneticists have found traces of this inequality. Some ancient populations contain far fewer male family lines than female ones. In other words, a relatively small number of men fathered a surprisingly large number of children. Agriculture didn't invent love, but it reshaped the social rules surrounding it. If our ancestors formed pair bonds, why does betrayal hurt so much? The answer may lie deep inside the human brain. Jealousy is one of the oldest emotions we have. It appears in every culture ever studied. Not because culture invented it, but because losing an important relationship carried real consequences throughout human history. A lost partner could mean less protection, less food, less support for raising children. Over thousands of generations, our ancestors evolved emotional systems designed to protect valuable relationships. That doesn't mean jealousy is always rational or always helpful, but it does suggest that it has very ancient roots. Love wasn't only about attraction. It was also about trust, commitment, cooperation, and sometimes fear of losing all three. After everything scientists have discovered, the answer is both simple and wonderfully complicated. Ancient humans probably did form lasting pair bonds. Those relationships were emotionally meaningful. They helped parents raise children. They strengthened cooperation. And they became one of the foundations of human society. But they were not identical to the modern idea of lifelong, perfectly exclusive marriage. Human relationships have always been flexible. Different environments created different social rules. Different cultures developed different traditions. Different people made different choices. The biology stayed remarkably consistent. The culture kept changing. Perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. Love didn't suddenly appear with civilization. It didn't begin with wedding ceremonies, or legal contracts, or diamond rings. Long before cities. Long before writing. Long before history itself. Two people could still choose to stay together. To share food. To protect each other. To raise children. To build a life. One day at a time. So, imagine yourself back beside that campfire. The stars stretch across the night sky. The fire burns low. The tribe slowly falls asleep. Across the flames, the person you've been quietly watching all season smiles back at you. 30,000 years separate their world from ours. But in that moment, the distance doesn't feel nearly as large as we once imagined. Because while civilization changed almost everything, being human may have changed far less.